We're going to switch from the entry of data by teachers to instead taking a look at what the system administrator would do. The gradebook needs to be correctly configured, so let's take a look at how the standards got in there and how you verify that they're configured correctly. We'll go into the Student Information System tree. The standards are housed inside the gradebook, and there's the standards page. Okay, so I'm going to start here on the far right. This is the screen where you import standards. Now, I had to start with a table, building a table for the standards. So, here's a table I built for the math standards. You can see the codes, the grade level assigned, subject area, the score type, the aggregation methods. So this is the aggregation method for multiple entries of the same standard over time, whereas if we're aggregating one child's standard to another child's standard, child being the individual standard, then how we aggregate them to form the overall score for the parent standard and ultimately for the course grade is a straight mean. So there's the difference between the two aggregation methods briefly. Here's how we told Synergy how we're clustering the standards into parent groupings. So individual standards are coded here. These standards are grouped under a cluster and multiple clusters under a domain. Okay, so in this case there was only, we had 8 standards all grouped under one cluster, one domain. In this case, however, though, we started a domain that has multiple clusters coded accordingly, and then each of the clusters has varying levels or varying numbers of standards. Well, not so varying in this example, 2, 2, 2. Okay, the weights are all equal to each other. We're not requiring them to show up in the gradebook, so is essential is a no. We're allowing them to be seen inside the portal. We're allowing gradebook correlation between the standard and the grade. We don't have a parent version of the description, so that column remains blank. And then we have our various titles. So the domains are titled, then the clusters, and if I move to the right of the cluster, you can see where the description of the standards begins. Let me go back over one column here. So, okay. So you can see the organizational structure again is a domain, a cluster. So when it's a domain, we don't write anything in the cluster or standard level. When it's a cluster, we don't write anything in the standard level, but they're all grouped. So these, as we go down, are replicated. So this is the first standard in the group, and it has a cluster and a domain associated with it, as do the rest. When we have our standards table configured correctly, then we go ahead and import it. Let me point out one other aspect of this, because I learned this one the hard way. When you get to the upper grade levels, sometimes you have standards that are used in more than one grade level, but Synergy requires the standard to be associated with a grade level. So we had to run an SQL query, or SQL script rather, in Synergy to add a grouped grade level. The reason for that is I started out the year by having these standards in each of the 4 grade levels. So it was in grade 9, you could find that same standard again in grade 10, and so on. Well, the problem it created was Synergy then viewed this standard as a different standard in each grade level. So if a teacher was teaching a class and had multiple grade levels represented among the students rostered there, and the first time they tied the standard to an assignment in the grade book, they did it from grade 9, and the second time in the standards picker they selected it from grade 10. They actually had 2 different standards, and it wasn't aggregating with each other. The data wasn't calculating correctly over time. So this was the fix to that, adding a grouped grade level and making sure the table includes that. So to get it in here, we just click under Import Standard Files, we click Add, and choose the file. Apologize. Locating it here. Okay, so we choose the right file here. Maybe if I'm ready to add my ELA standards, which are coming up shortly, I would then hit the upload button. It's going to process. I need to tell it what standard type to associate it with. So these are Common Core standards, and I can't process the file until I first hit save. Then if I save the file, I can then process and see if it imports correctly, or look at the error log and fix the issues. Alright, I'm not ready to import those just yet, so we're going to undo that and get out of this screen. Alright. There we go. So got that out of there. In the standard levels, this is where you can add standard levels. This is where I created those the two parent levels and then the child standard level. The standard types can also be associated there. Right now we're just working through the Common Core standards, getting them configured. So here's where the standards reside. I have a help ticket in to resolve the duplicate standards, so ignore that for the time being as I'm updating those. But you can see that the standards are located. So here's the domain. It then opens up the cluster. And if I open up the cluster, I can see the individual standards. So this domain has 3 clusters. This cluster has 2 standards. When you click on any one of those, it does display all the data associated with it, so you can make individual edits from this screen without having to do it from the import table. You know, maybe I mixed up the 2 aggregation methods and I can switch them here. And just hit save at that point. So that's configuration of the standards and checking on the individual settings associated with them and making edits.